Hey everyone, Primal here, and I'm back with a guide for patch 10.15, and that guide is to Mech. So, Mech has undergone a few changes over the last few patches, and now the TLDR is that instead of running Mech as a reroll build, you just play Mech as a standard build. And the reason why is because you don't need to 3-star your mech anymore because it doesn't scale as much with star level. So getting a 3-star mech is much less powerful than it used to be in prior patches. However, the trade-off is that Riot made it so that a 1-star mech is much better than a 1-star mech used to be. It's an immediately powerful synergy that you're going to want to play the moment you get a Fizz, Annie, and Rumble. So that's a new style of playing mech that I'm going to cover in this guide. Let's get right into it. Okay, so this is the basic board that you're going to ideally be looking to achieve at level 8 with the new variant of Mech. And let's walk through some of the strengths and weaknesses of this composition right here. So the first thing to note is that this build is extremely flexible. It can use a ton of different items and works off of a variety of different item starts. Ideally, you want a bunch of chain vests, but you can work well with swords because Shaco can carry. You can work well with tears because Victor can carry. You can work well with gloves because the mech can utilize gloves well. So it's an extremely flexible build. Additionally, it has multiple carry threats. In addition to the mech itself being a really potent carry with certain items, Victor is generally going to be your most reliable carry and your highest DPS carry. And Shaco can actually be a huge carry in this build if you can get his core items. So it has a bunch of different carry threats. So if you're struggling to hit Victor, you might be able to hit Shaco and have him carry you until you hit Victor, or vice versa. Let's talk about the weaknesses though. It is a comp that ultimately is super reliant on finding a single unit, and that's Fizz. No Fizz means no mech. And some games you're just going to really struggle to find Fizz, or Fizz is going to be really contested because he's a really strong unit in his own regard. So this is a build that you can force if you get good at transitioning from just having a tanky frontline into having mech. So learning who are good item carriers for mech and learning how to play them and conserving health until you find a Fizz. But just keep in mind, there are going to be games where you low roll, you get unlucky, you don't get Fizz, you just say BG, and you move on. Another weakness is that it can be dependent on Victor to carry. Even though there are multiple carry threats, I think in order to win the game, you do need Victor to have good items, and he needs tears. Some lobbies, tears are going to be heavily contested because tear is also used in sorcerer builds and is a pretty high demand item because generally people who want tiers want multiple tiers. So it is somewhat item dependent in that sense in order to take a first place. Mech is also extremely susceptible to Zephyrs and CC, particularly if you don't have a Quicksilver Sash. So just keep that in mind. Of course, if you do have a Quicksilver Sash, you're chilling. But if you don't have one, you will have to be more mindful about Zephyrs and position really cleanly in the lobby to make sure that your mech doesn't get Zephyred. And finally, this build is really weak against Giant Slayer stacking. So the reason why is because Mech has a lot of health. The Mech unit has a lot of health. And the way Giant Slayer works, if you hover over here, is the holder spells and basic attacks do 20% bonus damage. And if they have more than 1750 max health, the bonus increases to 80%. Right? So they're getting 80% extra damage if you have over 1750 health, and the mech has over 1750 health. So people who stack a lot of Giant Slayers, like Jinx, for example, can cause a lot of problems for you because your mech will just melt like butter no matter what item you build on them. So just keep that in mind. Jinx is not super popular right now, so it's not as much of an issue, but even like a Jhin with one Giant Slayer can be a huge threat to you. Okay, so now that we've covered a little bit of the strengths and weaknesses, let's talk about the principles. So core, the way this comp works is you have basically a single unit at frontline because all of these guys combine into one unit, but it's basically a uber tank in the form of the mech. And as such, the mech is actually going to be your most important unit for the majority of the game and who you want to prioritize when it comes to items. We'll get into what items you want to build on mech later in the guide, but just remember, big mech is good. You want to, it's like Big Mac. Big Mech is good. You want to make sure that your mech is as stacked as possible before you start worrying too much about the items on the rest of your comp. and your mech can do enough damage to carry you through mid game. It's only late game that they don't really have the damage to carry you anymore. So for the majority of the game, the mech is going to be the most important unit. And think of it this way: mech is basically three units, right? So it's 3 units worth of value that you get items on. Okay, so you have your big front line, and you're going to build around the synergies for the mech, right? So the synergies that mech has are, in addition to obviously mech, you get Sorcerer from Annie, you get Demolitionist from Rumble, and you get Infiltrator from Fizz. So you're going to want to complete all those synergies and add in basically one additional unit of that class into your backline. So for example, you're going to add Ziggs for Demolitionist, Victor for another Sorcerer, Shaco for another Infiltrator, and then you're going to have room at level 8 for 2 more units. And generally speaking, you're going to want those to be Mystics. There are variants of mech where you go Infiltrator, for example, especially if you have an Infiltrator Spatula, but this is a more standard non-spatula variant. Okay, so in addition to having this set of synergies and these units, you're going to be looking to have one of 2 carries, either Victor or Shaco. I think Victor is more important than Shaco. Shaco is someone who is not necessarily going to carry you to a first place, but Victor will carry you to a first place. So you're going to prioritize Victor over Shaco. We'll talk a little bit about Victor's itemization later in the guide. But Shaco can also be a really effective carry if you get a bunch of swords. So basically, depending on what items you get, you're either going to veer toward a Shaco carry into a Victor carry, or just straight up go into a Victor carry. And these guys are going to do the majority of your backline damage, whereas the mech is going to focus more on the front line, but will eventually kill the backline if you are able to cut through the front line quickly if the enemy team has a squishy front line. All right, so this is a pretty complex build. It can be simple, but it has a lot of different variants that you can play. We're going to limit the scope of conversation just to make this guide as easy to follow as possible. But I will talk about, in the itemization portion of the guide, the different sorts of pivots that you can make. And you should really experiment with this build until you feel comfortable knowing what items mean you should go in what direction. But let's talk about the core items. Again, Mech is the most important person to itemize. And the key items that you want on Mech are actually not these items. These are from before. But QSS actually is one of the most important items. I would say if there's any item that is close to non-negotiable, although arguably it's non-negotiable, I would say it's QSS. And the reason why is because think of it this way. If your mech gets Zephyred, that's essentially 3 units that are gone for the price of 1. Really, really bad. And additionally, these 3 units compose the entirety of your front line. So you're going to want QSS to prevent Zephyr. It also help you versus things like Wukong Golds, Vi Ultimates, etc. So really, really important item to have on your mech. And it also gives your mech an additional 20% dodge chance, which is also huge because that 20% dodge chance means that an additional 2 out of every 10 auto attacks from the enemy are going to be missing you, which is really, really valuable versus Jhin or Jinx or Vayne or Aurelia, auto attackers like that. The other important item, and we'll cover these items in a second because these are also good items, but my preferred items are QSS and then Bramble. Bramble Vest is another item that gives your mech a lot of extra survivability, and it's pretty simple the way the item works. In addition to giving you a lot of armor, it also negates all bonus damage from critical hits, right? So every champion in the game has a base chance to crit of 25%, no matter what the unit is. Right? So if they auto attack you, there's a 1 in 4 chance that they're going to do a crit. And Bramble Vest means that if the crit hits you, it's just going to do normal basic attack damage instead of critical damage. So that makes your mech a lot more survivable versus auto attack based threats like Jhin, for example. And then finally, an item I really like is Ionic Spark. Now, Ionic Spark is an item that you didn't really used to build that often on mech in the earlier days of set 3. And that's because you would primarily run mech with infiltrators who did physical damage. In this variation of mech, your primary carry is going to be Victor, ideally. And Victor does magic damage, and the mech does magic damage too. So Ionic Spark will reduce the magic resist of anyone that the mech is near, which is great. And in fact, I think the mech has... I'm wondering, does the mech spread Ionic Spark farther than other units? I'm not sure. But in any case, it provides you a ton of magic resistance reduction, which is valuable for the mech and for Victor. And later in the game, if you pick up an Aurelion Soul, he's benefiting from that too. It gives your mech a little bit of extra magic resist as well, and it makes your mech's ult stronger. So really, really good item for your mech. However, alternative items, and I remember one of the benefits of the build is that it's super flexible, that work well here are the items that I mistakenly had on screen before. So Shroud of Stillness is an excellent item on mech. The way this item works is anyone who is basically in a 2-hex column of the Shroud holder will have their cost to ult increased, right? Which means basically it'll cost them more mana to ult, which means they ult more slowly. Really, really powerful item if you position your mech correctly. Another really good item on mech is Trap Claw. And this variation of mech with QSS, Shroud of Stillness, and Trap Claw is basically called Dodge Mech. And the reason why is because if you look at these items, they all provide dodge chance, right? And when you have a mech with like 50 to 60% dodge chance, it's very, very good against auto attackers because those auto attackers are, unless they have a rapid fire cannon, are going to be missing a lot of their shots, meaning your mech is even more survivable. So this is another really good variant of mech. Another good variant of mech, if you're interested in getting really crazy, is actually having a carry mech, right? So it's like a Gundam mech. You could put Bloodthirster on mech, and the reason Bloodthirster is quite good is because the mech, every time it auto attacks, it hits multiple units. So it can heal off of hitting multiple units at the same time, which is like awesome and kind of badass. And another item that you can put on if you want your mech to be the carry is Titan's Resolve. So Titan's Resolve will give your mech additional damage as it takes damage or deals damage, and it stacks up to 50 times, and then you get an additional 25 armor and magic resistance, and they increase in size. So lots of good stats, makes your mech a carry. I personally don't prefer this last variant of the build because I think you already have kind of enough damage to win if you have good items for Victor and Shaco. But it's an interesting variant that you can play if your items call for it. Okay, so let's talk about the other guys in this comp and what they're doing. Ziggs, don't put any items on him. He just doesn't really need them. Occasionally, people might put like an Infiltrator spat on Ziggs if they manage to get one. And then at 9, they'll add in 4 Infiltrators. But generally speaking, you're not going to be putting anything on Ziggs. He's primarily there to be a stun bot and synergy bot. Now, big boy Victor. Victor is really important to itemize. In fact, I would say to take a first place, you're going to need to have good items on Victor. The most important item on Victor is blue buff. Pretty simple. You just want him to ult a lot. And blue buff ensures that A, he ults as quickly as possible, and B, he ults as often as possible. So this item is going to be better than Shojin's for Victor. But if you can't get a blue buff, you can work with the Shojin's. It's going to be a little less effective, but it's fine. But either blue buff or Shojin's is what you want to go to. Ideally, the blue buff. And then as far as Victor's primary damage item, you're going to want a Morello's. Morello's is really good on Victor because Victor's base damage isn't that high, especially since he got nerfed. So things like Death Cap aren't as good because they are a percentage increase on top of his damage, right? However, Morello's, the way Morello's works is that it's 25% of the target's maximum health as true damage, right? So that's just straight up a quarter of their life gone over 10 seconds. And Victor hits a lot of the enemy team due to the way his targeting works. The way his targeting works is that he will hit the 2 units on the enemy team that are farthest away from one another, right? So for example, imagine that this is the enemy board. He would hit, let's say the mech spawns over here, right? He would hit the mech and Karma, right? So if you understand Victor, the way his targeting works, you can use that to your advantage to snipe enemy carries like Vayne, Jhin, etc. for really, really good results. And Morello's works super well with him because Victor will sweep his ult across often, 80 to 90% of the enemy team. Next unit you want to have in, and this is at 8, I'll talk about what to do at 9 at the end of the guide, is Soraka. Soraka is just a really, really powerful individual unit who provides Mystic, which is nice for your team, just getting MR because most of the damage at the end of the game is magic damage. And the way Soraka's healing works is that it heals, and the healing is pretty huge for the survivability of your team. So I really like having Soraka in. You're also going to put in Karma, and we'll get to this guy in a second. Karma to complete Mystic. And the reason why you're going to want Karma is because you're going to be running Darkstar because you're going to have Shaco, in, right? So Shaco's going to be giving you Infiltrator, and Shaco's also a really, really potent carry mid-game in his own right. And even late game, if you have the right items on him, he can carry you. So Shaco is going to be probably the best Infiltrator that you can throw in at level 8, because you're not really going to have a level 2 Echo until much later in the game. So Shaco gives you Infiltrator. He can snipe a lot of backline units in his own right, and if you just a GA on him makes him a big threat. So you're gonna play Shaco and Karma for Darkstar and Mystic. Okay, cool. So let's talk a little bit about other item options for your backline. So Shojins, another good item for Victor. Ideally, if you can get all 3 of these items, you'll be in really, really good shape. But more realistically, you're not going to get 3 tiers. So if you can only get 2 tiers, definitely prioritize blue buff. But if you can't get 2 tiers, you can also just play Shojins and Morellos. And best items for Shaco, if you can itemize him, and again, you should prioritize Mech, then Victor, then Shaco. But if you can't itemize Shaco, really good items on him are GA, and then Bloodthirster, and then Rapid Fire Cannon. Bloodthirster enables Shaco to just keep on healing and be one of the last people standing, meaning that he'll stack his Darkstar buff, right? Because the way Darkstar works is that anytime one of your allies dies, Shaco gets stronger. So you want Shaco to be as the last man standing, so he gets his ult off. And GA also helps ensure that he's the last man standing. And then Rapid Fire Cannon helps keep Shaco safe, right? It keeps him out of range of big CC and allows him to be a huge threat while keeping himself relatively safe and unharmed. But in terms of items, more realistically, you're not going to be able to get all these items on all of them. So prioritize your Mech, right? Try to get these items on Mech. You want to get your Bramble. You want to get your Ionic. You're going to want to worry about getting your blue buff onto Victor. And then Shaco, he can make do with just a GA. If you can't get even a GA, I would probably stay away from putting more items on him, because I find that with just a Bloodthirster, he still dies pretty quickly. But if all you can get is a GA, I think he's still a pretty efficient unit. All right, let's talk a little bit about level 8 and 9. So this is what you'll usually have when you hit 8 immediately. But maybe if you high roll a unit, you can put in something like a Gangplank instead of a Fizz, right? Because he gives you Demolitionist. Gangplank is generally not going to really be doing much, but he can occasionally get an ult off at level 1 without items. If you manage to get a GA and it's late game, you should put the GA on Gangplank instead of Shaco, though, for the most part. And then he can maybe get a quality ult off, which can change the game just by stunning a lot of enemy units, because it's such a big radius on his ult. If you're playing Echo, let's say you hit an Echo 2, you can play Echo 2 instead of Shaco, right? And if you're playing Echo, you don't need Karma anymore, right? So what you should do is you should look for Lulu, right? So this would be like a high roll level 8. At level 9, usually the best unit to add, because we already have most of the core synergies here, is going to be Aurelion Sol. Now, you might be asking, why would I play Aurelion Sol here? He's not adding any synergies to my team. He's kind of just a standalone unit. Reason why is because Aurelion Sol is just really, really fucking good. Just a really, really powerful unit. Probably the best, the strongest, like 5 cost without any synergies. So Aurelion Sol, he does a lot of damage. He has a huge mana drain, which is a big deal, right? Delaying the enemy's ult. And if you get a Morellos late, you can actually put a Morellos on Aurelion Sol if you hit Aurelion Sol before your Victor is online, and just put that on him instead, and he spreads Morellos even better than Victor, because his ult is basically hitting the whole map. So Aurelion Sol is generally going to be the unit you want to add at 9. There are different additional variants of this you can do, though. So let's say, we'll keep this in, let's drop Aurelion Sol. Let's say you get an Infiltrator spat, right? So let's say you get Infiltrator spat, and let's say you slam it on GP. What you can do is actually end up running 4 Infiltrators. So you could say, instead of replacing the Shaco, you can keep Shaco, and you can add Echo in, right? And then you have, your 3 mechs, you have Demolitionist, you have Sorcerer, you still get to keep 2 Mystic, which is awesome, and now you have 4 Infiltrator, because Fizz counts as an Infiltrator as well, even though he's in the mech. And Infiltrator is a really good trait in this build because Infiltrator increases the attack speed of all the Infiltrators, meaning more attack speed for the Mech. And the Mech is doing splash damage every time they auto attack. And it means that the Mech ults even faster, which is a really, really big deal. So spat, if you get a spat, one of the best things to do is go 4 Infiltrators at 9, and then you can also keep all the rest of your synergies. So that's basically how you can think about the comp at level 8 and 9. As you can see, it's really, really flexible from an item perspective. I'm going to show you a few scenes from a game that I played the other day to show you how you can think about going from early game into Mech, because this is a question I get to a lot. Like, what should I do when I'm waiting for Rumble and Annie? So we're going to jump around a little bit. I'm just going to show you sort of quick shots at the game. So good item carriers. Protectors can be good item carriers, right? You can have, in this case, I had a Nico who I picked up with a chain vest off Carousel, and I had J4, and then I played Infiltrator backline. So pretty much any frontline that can be either Protectors or Vanguards, Brawlers even, but although Brawlers are probably one of the weaker front lines right now. And Infiltrators, if you get like an early Shaco, can be really, really good because you can keep the Shaco all game, and these Protectors will give Darkstar to Shaco and just provide enough frontline for your Shaco to do work. And in this particular case, I got a Thieves Glove really early, so I decided, okay, fuck it, we're just going to go for Thieves Glove Shaco. He's really efficient and uses these items well. Note, in stage 2, you're generally going to avoid holding Annie and Rumble. The reason why is because, Annie. Let's talk about Annie first. Annie, you're generally going to avoid holding because she's not a super strong unit in her own right. Doesn't have great synergies with a lot of early game units. So there's no really need to hold her. There are better frontliners you can hold. And it's easy enough to find Annie. By the time you find Fizz, you generally will find another Annie. However, Rumble is actually a really good item holder and unit that you can keep for the whole game. Because Rumble actually works really well with Ziggs. So looking back at the board here, you're going to see that later in the game you want Demolitionists, right? So what you could do, as an example, is you could play something like this early game. You could play Rumble, throw the items on him that are going to stay on him anyway. You play something like Ziggs, and maybe, let's say you do have to play Brawlers, you play Malphite in there. You can throw in a Zed, right? And this will give you Rebel buff. And then you might throw in another Brawler like, let's say, an early Blitzcrank or an Alawi or something like that. So yeah, there are different ways that you can get into your eventual build. I would say the big notes are look out for the following units. Ziggs and Rumble, really strong combo. Protectors plus Infiltrators, pretty strong combo. Vanguards plus Infiltrators, pretty strong combo. And in terms of, let's say you get an early blue buff, the good item holders for blue buff are Ziggs again. So Ziggs is, again, a unit you're going to want to look out for early. Ari is an excellent blue buff holder. Twisted Fate is an excellent blue buff holder. And Cassiopeia is a really good blue buff holder. If we can even find her, there she is. So these are all really good item holders for Victor. So yeah, basically the way that you want to be thinking about the game is not, hey, I need to find the Mech as soon as possible. But instead, I need to find good item holders to find the items that Mech needs and who will save me HP while I play the Fizz waiting game. Generally speaking, you're not going to be finding Fizz until level 7. If you're bleeding out, let's say you're below 70 HP at stage 4-1, you might want to just roll it down to find Fizz and get the Mech online ASAP because Mech is a huge power spike the moment you find it. Alternatively, if you feel pretty healthy and let's say this is your board. Let's say it's the Rumble board again. So it's Ziggs plus Rumble plus Malphite plus Zed plus, let's even say it's an Alawi, and we're going to play a back here to bait in blitz hooks, right? And let's say you threw in, maybe even threw in 4 Brawlers, fuck it. So we threw in a Vi and a Blitzcrank. This board will generally sustain you to stage 4-3, and there's not really a need to drop this board until you find a Fizz. So basically, don't overly focus on the Fizz, just focus on conserving HP. Eventually the Fizz will come, And if a Fizz doesn't come before at level 7, you just go level 8 and you just roll down all your gold and you look for that Fizz. And the moment you find a Fizz, Rumble and Annie, you should switch out the your front line because it's immediately going to be stronger. So I would go ahead and just drop these units. Maybe in my roll down I found a Shaco, so I play Shaco, and then I throw in Annie and Rumble. Sorry, not Annie and Rumble, Annie and Fizz because we already have the Rumble in this case, and that's really, really strong. Okay, so, let's be completionist here. Where's that Fizz? Oh, I'm low rolling, I can't find Fizz. Okay, we found the Fizz. Yeah, and then the moment you find the Fizz, your front line is going to be complete, and you don't need to worry about finding other frontliners. And then you're going to want to focus on finding your Victor, who hopefully you found at least one Victor at the same time. And then you throw in whatever mystics you can find. Ideally, it's Soraka and Karma. And one last note, you want to position Karma next to Shaco, because Shaco benefits the most from the attack speed. So ideally, you put Karma next to Shaco. You can put her in the corner or over here. It doesn't really matter that much as long as she's tethered to Shaco, assuming Shaco has any items on him at all. One last thing. This is something that my coach, Goobums, shout out to Goobums, taught me. Here's a quick way to reposition your mech. So one thing a lot of people do when they're playing mech is they'll do this when they want to switch their mech, right? So for those of you who are newer to the game, there's 3 mech pilots. Wherever, basically, you can think of the positioning as being dependent on how far to the left or the right the mechs are in totality. If they're evenly distributed, it'll spawn right here, right? A lot of people, when they're trying to move their mech left or right, they'll do this. So they'll move Rumble and then they'll move Fizz, right? And then it'll spawn where Rumble is. That's 2 clicks, right? It's not the end of the world, right? But if you're really trying to up your performance, what you can do is keep this standard positioning, and then last minute, you actually just move 1 unit. And this will have the mech spawn on the left, or you move the Annie over here, and this will have the mech spawn on the right. And you want to just practice at doing this quickly, right? Based on where the enemy threats are, you want to position to the left or right. And ideally, what you would do is you would have, let's say the enemy's all on the right side, you would position your mech to the right and your Shaco on the right as well. Or let's say they're on the left, you would position your mech to the left and your Shaco to the left as well. However, in a lobby where there's 7 or more people remaining, it can be really hard sometimes to predict where people are going to be. So one thing you can do is just say, okay, every round, I'm going to make sure Shaco and Mech are on different sides so that no matter what, the carry is under threat. So you might decide to put your Mech on the right and keep your Shaco on the left, or vice versa. Do something like this, right? Boom. Right, and that's how you can quickly reposition your mech. With this build, positioning is really key. So if you feel like you're getting good items but you're still getting blasted, check your positioning. Having your mech on the correct side is the difference between completely obliterating the enemy team in a fight versus losing really, really hard. So get practice at scouting and making sure your positioning is good. And that's pretty much it. So this is a bit of a longer guide. As always, if you have any comments, suggestions, feedback, questions, please let me know. I'm also looking to create even more content since, unfortunately, my season is over for TFT for set 3. So if you have any other content you'd like me to do, let me know and I will get that to you. Peace, guys. Really fun talking to you. And good luck with Mech.